Welcome all to this special production of the National Writing Project's podcast, NWP Radio, where we are so excited to invite teacher and New York Times bestselling author GENE Luen Yang to join us. He is perhaps our first math teacher slash graphic novelist to be on our show. We're very excited about that. Today is May 5th, 2020, and I am here with Connecticut Writing Project at Fairfield University Director, Bryan Ripley Crandall, who contacted me in March and wondered if we might be able to host a special program to celebrate those who are taking small steps toward great leaps. Missing the madness of the NCAA tournament, Bryan said we needed to do a show featuring Dragon Hoops, a new graphic novel published by First Second by GENE Luen Yang. I'm supposed to advance slides. It's National Teacher Appreciation Week, and today's show is dedicated to educators everywhere coaching and supporting young people in the supportive learning, especially in these times and in online environments. We hope everyone's doing their best to remain safe, level-headed, and proactive, especially with their health during these challenging times. And of course, as always, we especially want to shout out our National Writing Project family of educators. We wanted to host this special show for writers, educators, and young people who are passionate about storytelling, especially those involved in sports. Today, I have several guests with us to talk hoops, that is, writing, storytelling, and stepping forward to take action. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Bryan, as well as his cousin, Mark, our superstar writer, GENE Luen Yang, and teachers, Bility and William King. Welcome, everyone, to our show.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Hey, Bryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about this show and why you think it's a good time to think creatively with our network, teachers, parents, and young people, especially right now?
Thanks, Tanya. You know, there are two passions I have in life. Number one is the National Writing Project, and number two is basketball, March Madness. And I really missed March Madness this year. And you're going to ask Abu a little bit later on. I can't play basketball, but I can watch basketball really well. Anyway, I missed the tournament this year, and as a K-12 teacher, I always supported the athletes in my school, and I have behind my Louisville and Syracuse banner. I would have my Kentucky banner, but I never attended Kentucky. And so I thought, this year, what am I going to do when the tournament canceled? And somehow, someone sent me a copy of Dragon Hoops in the mail, and I saw the cover, and I was like, what? And it was this cover, which is the basketball. And I said, I'm going to read it. And I read it right away. And I blogged about it the next morning and have become a fanatic ever since. I realized that in this March Madness and during this health crisis that we're in, I needed some hope, and Dragon Hoops provided that hope. And then it made me think, oh, my cousin Mark needs a copy of Dragon Hoops too for his work, Hoops for Hope, that he does in Africa. And then I started thinking, we are definitely going to use this with young writers in our literacy labs in Connecticut. And I said, we've got a show here, and I want to share this with other directors and teachers and parents and families that are looking for something that they could do with their kids with a great book. So, you know, the next slide is a prompt that I often give to students when I do workshops on sports writing. And I asked them to pick what life skill is the most important to you to be successful. Is it integrity? Is it focus? Is it self-esteem? Is it sense of humor? Is it responsibility? Is it self-awareness? Is it teamwork? And the kids usually write a little bit, and then they turn and talk. Well, if we had time, I would have everybody do this today, and I would even interview Tanya about what her answer would be. My answer is usually integrity. It's one of my favorite words. And then we move on and we talk about Hoops for Hope and the work they do in Africa, but we also apply these life skills to characters. And all of these life skills are huge on every page in Dragon Hoops. And so I couldn't help but think about, you know, the story of basketball at Bishop O'Dowd High School out in California. And I know without a doubt, we're using this book. We're going to be exploring this with these life skills, and we're going to be talking to teachers about ways that they can teach this. So anyway, I'm very honored to be here today to unite my cousin, you know, my Syracuse family and my Connecticut Writing Project with GENE LUEN YANG. What an honor it is to be here with him. And I'm ready to take a metaphorical step with him and move forward. As I think about the wonderful ways that a graphic novel such as this can be used by writing teachers everywhere. So Tanya, yeah, Dragon Hoops.
Dragon Hoops. So first of all, you missed, Gene, when we were getting ready to start the show, that there's a lot of in my case, fangirling going on as we were looking at your body of work, but we're really excited to talk about your new book. And it's an honor and a privilege to have you here with us. So thank you. Many people in our network of writing project teachers know your graphic novels. We love reading them ourselves, and we use them to make connections with young people we work with. I have so many questions I'd love to ask you, but I'll try to keep it to a couple. Can you start by telling us about Dragon Hoops? Maybe give us the story behind the story.
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me here. I am really honored. First, that you were able to get a hold of my book. I know that getting books nowadays is not as easy as it used to be. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for inviting me and putting this whole thing together. It's amazing. It's amazing that we're able to still connect as the community, even when things are difficult outside. Dragon Hoops began, I have to tell you, I was really surprised. I ended up spending 5 years of my life working on a book about basketball, because as a kid, I hated basketball. I hated all sports in general. I don't know if you can tell through the screen, but I am not an athletic guy. I was terrible at sports as a kid. I had no musculature. I had no sense of coordination. And that's why I ended up drifting towards comic books. But I was a high school teacher for 17 years. I taught computer science at Bishop O'Dowd High School in Oakland, California. And my last year there was the 2014-2015 season. The beginning of that school year, everybody on campus was talking about the men's varsity basketball team, and up until that point, basketball had kind of been creeping its way into my life. I have a son who's 16 now, but when he was in 5th grade, he joined his basketball team at his school, and I started having to go to his games. Yeah, I would have rather had him in like manga club or something, but he wanted to join the basketball team. In any case, people were talking about this team on campus, and I felt like I had to go find out what the story was all about. So I got to know the coach. His name is Lou Ritchie. He had this really intense story from when he was a kid. And as soon as he told me that story, I knew I had to do a book about it, even though at that point I knew nothing about basketball. That's how compelling his story was. And his story ended up being chapter 1 in Dragon Hoops. I ended up following that team for a season. And during that season, I really became a fan of the sport. A lot of that was, I realized basketball's importance in the context of American history. It is not just a bunch of guys on a court bouncing a ball. I feel like, I think this is probably true of all sports, but I saw it very clearly in basketball. It's an expression of human courage. That's what's going on. That's why we go to games. We want to see an expression of human courage, and we want that courage to bleed into us during that game.
That's lovely. And I think really true. We are representing a huge network of educators who write and teach writing. So often when we get together, we, especially with an author who we want to celebrate in our mix, we want to know about their composing process. So I'm wondering, how do you go from an idea, also graphic novels, so you don't just write a book in one genre, you have to write and illustrate. How do you go from this idea to illustrating an entire book? I think I'll start by just asking you, how do you get there?
Sure. Well, so I usually start my projects with a lot of research. It seems like the older I get, the more research I do. For Dragon Hoops in particular, while I was following the team, I was also reading a lot about the history of basketball. At the beginning, I was only reading to get to know the game. I was not planning on putting any of that history into the book itself. But then so much of what I was reading was actually resonating on with what I was seeing on the court, right? So for instance, high school basketball in California is pretty diverse. Like when you go and walk into that gym, there are kids of every background playing with each other. And we kind of take that for granted. But as I was reading about basketball history, especially when I read about the 1948 game between the Lakers and the Globetrotters, you realize that people really had to put themselves out there to get us to the kind of world and the kind of court that we see today. So I started with that kind of research. After that, I will write out a general outline of what the entire book is like. So for Dragon Hoops, that's when I figured out what games I would include and what players I would highlight. And then from there, I do thumbnails. So I do sketches of what every page in the book looks like. And then I'll finally work on the art. So this is the very first time that I did an entire graphic novel digitally. There was no paper involved in Dragon Hoops. All the books that I've done before that, I've done on paper. A lot of my younger cartoonist friends used to make fun of me for still working on paper. So I felt peer pressure to switch. And it wasn't faster for me, but I felt like it was a really fun experience to draw on computer, directly on computer.
It was. So you enjoyed that process.
Yeah, I think so. The younger cartoonists who told me to do it, who peer pressured me into doing it, they told me that if I made the switch, I would go faster. But I did not find that to be true. Probably because I'm like 47 now, But it was still fun.
I feel you being over 50 and in the house with a lot of 20-year-olds back from college saying, why can't you do anything?
I'm going to hop in real quick because you just inspired another question. One of the things that I loved about Dragon Hoops is not only the historical perspective that you took, but the inclusion of so much of America's diversity, including women in sports. And Sendra Bergedsen as the first introducing it to basketball to an all-girls school. And I just wanted to point that out because I went to the same high school as Brianna Stewart of UConn, who's an incredible now WNBA player. And I just wanted to give that shout out that she needs to read this book too. So so tell me a little bit about the inclusion of the diversity and why you chose that angle.
Well, as an Asian American, I think I've always been interested in diversity issues and issues of inclusion, right? But for basketball in particular, I felt like it was just organic to the sport. This is something I didn't know before starting basketball. Was at the very beginning, basketball was kind of considered like a losery sport. The big sports were baseball and football, at least here in America. Basketball was it was popular in YMCAs, but really the communities that gravitated towards the sport were these mostly like immigrant communities or communities of color who couldn't afford to maintain a field. If you were the kind of community that couldn't afford to maintain a field, you would gravitate towards this sport that only needed a ball and a hoop and like a little patch of concrete. That's all you really needed to play, right? And it took a lot of work, I think, and a lot of courage for basketball to grow into what we know and see today. Like where the NBA is like this massive worldwide organization with a lot of power and a lot of prestige. That wasn't a given at the very beginning, So a lot of that stuff, I feel like maybe I was sensitive to it because I'm an Asian American writer, but it really was just embedded in the history of the sport.
Gene, can I ask you, all the teachers listening, all the young people who I'm sure are tuning in are going to want to know this sort of classic author question. Do you have any advice for us as writers?
I have the privilege of teaching with Hamlin University. I teach as part of their MFA program. Most of my students are adults who are interested in writing for children and young people. And sometimes one of my students will come up to me and they'll be like, I have these 2 or 3 different ideas and I'm not sure which one I should go after. And then I'll always tell them, which one scares you the most? That's the one that you should try to write, and that was kind of what Dragon Hoops was for me. Dragon Hoops at the very beginning, especially, it scared me so much because I didn't know anything about basketball, but ultimately I think by actually doing the book, I do feel like I grew as an author, but I also feel like I got all sorts of other stuff out of it. You know, I became pretty good friends with the coach, with Lou Ritchie. I got to know this amazing, I mean, basketball is not just a sport. It's like a corner of humanity. I got to know this corner of humanity, and I got to understand. I also think of sports as like a narrative tradition. I also got to understand this totally different narrative tradition that I knew nothing about before. So I got a lot out of that. And, you know, and I think that's the advice I would give to writers is figure out what scares you and try to take a step towards that.
Taking a step. It's a big theme in your book and in our talk today. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry, I'm going totally off script, but I can't transition to talk to Mark until I have to ask, as another Bay Area person, how you could be living in the town of the Warriors at this time and not have already been a basketball fan.
You know, okay, so the year that I followed the Dragons, that was the same year that the Warriors won their first championship in like 30 years or something. I remember when I was in college, I lived with a bunch of basketball fans. They really annoyed me because they would always want to watch sports highlights at like 10:45, no matter what everybody else was doing. But they were huge Warriors fans, and at that point, the Warriors' motto was "It's a great timeout." Like they would tell you to go to the game because it's a great timeout. They wouldn't even promise winning or anything, you know. So that's when I thought of the Warriors before the book. That's how I thought of them. All they are is a great timeout. So it was really after the book came out that the Warriors really became like this huge thing, you know, where they're in conversation.
And ready.
Yeah. And it was fun to follow. I'm glad I had gotten into basketball when I did, because it was really fun to follow as somebody from the Bay Area.
Indeed. Gene, thanks so much for being here. We're going to bring you back in near the end of the show, but I want to hand the microphone to Bryan, who's going to...
Got that microphone. So I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and obviously that would make me a huge Syracuse University basketball fan with Jim Boeheim. And all those years I would watch basketball, and then I would visit my cousin down in Long Island in Amagansett, and he was a few years older than me. And then we went to college, and he grew his hair long and I grew my hair long, and we got very much active with our studies and making the world a better place. And so when I read this and I was thinking about individuals that I know have stepped forward in the world, I started thinking about my cousin Mark and the work that he has been doing with his program, Hoops for Hope. So I want to welcome my cousin Mark Crandall to my National Writing. Somebody said that I was muted, but I wasn't muted. I unmuted myself.
We just had a little glitch, but it's okay. Keep going.
Anyway, my cousin has been over to Fairfield University, where I teach now, and done work with the men's basketball team and the women's basketball team, and has worked with their athletes in support of my work on literacy in sports. And so it's awesome to have him invited into this National Writing Project world today. And so I'm going to hand it over to my cousin Mark to tell us a little bit about the work that he does. I think it's important for this audience of teachers and parents to know about the skills for life and the way you've been using your work to make a difference, not only locally, but globally. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Bryan. It's great to be here, and Gene, quite an honor to be part of this panel with you. Yeah, I've been part of basketball has been part of my life ever since we were little kids. I grew up as an only child, and pretty much just had a hoop in my driveway that kept me inspired and having fun. And I was lucky enough to go from Long Island here as a 15-year-old over to Africa as a Rotary exchange student, a little bit of fate and destiny that took me out of my comfort zone. And but it was the place that made me feel more comfortable when I came to Africa. And I know, Gene, as you're learning about this game, it is highly international and loved across this planet. And when I got to Zimbabwe as a 15-year-old, I saw how powerful this game was, not only for myself, but for the kids in my school. And I started working with young people here in America. I have a summer camp for children that brings youth together, and we use sport for all the classic reasons of helping kids have fun and be entertained in the summer. And so I returned back to Zimbabwe to start Hoops for Hope in 1995. And there we're really using that power of sport. I know, Gene, you touched on how it has become so popular here in America, especially in a lot of the urban areas. And because it really doesn't have a big historical past in parts of Africa. Usually, you know, it's about soccer, it can be about cricket, it can be about rugby, but basketball really doesn't have a lot of that historical past, although it has been on the continent for a long time. And it has so many of the attributes that make it popular here in America. But as an educator and as somebody who wanted to create change, it was a sport that really could be harnessed to do so much good. And so we're not only playing sport, but we're also using that time as responsibly as possible by training young leaders and young coaches within their own communities to not only teach the game, but also deliver very powerful life skills that deal with lots of health messages. We've been dealing with viruses for quite a long time, dealing with HIV prevention and cholera prevention, and we're well suited right now to be dealing with the COVID pandemic in these communities that's taking over our world. If I can just share with you a little bit about our 7 tools, we kind of deliver them to the kids. I like to explain it. It's like a builder. If you're going to go and build a house, you're going to carry with you on your tool belt, you know, your hammer and your screwdriver and your saw. We treat these life skills kind of like that, where you should have them in your possession at all times. And they're simple values: focus, sense of humor, having self-awareness, being responsible, integrity, Bryan, your favorite one, having confidence, and teamwork. And I think they all come into play at every aspect of life, but we use them in a way to help kids prepare themselves to make the best decisions in the face of so many challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. So our programs are really involved around having that young mentor coach who's from that community, who speaks the language of those kids, who is there day in and day out to work with the kids, not only in sport, but to sit in a circle, the power of a circle, to be there, to communicate and let these kids bring up the problems and challenges that they face every day and know that they can work as a team to help solve them on a day-to-day basis in communities that are frankly highly challenged.
Yeah, and I'm thinking for the teachers that are out there that are listening, or the parents who are looking for writing assignments for their kids at home right now, or even if there are kids at home right now listening, one of the projects that we did at Fairfield that was really successful, we read The Crossover by Kwame Alexander, and then the older kids read Matt Della Pina. And we had a contest, and we put it out to middle schools around the area, where we asked kids to choose one of these life skills and nominate a mentor for life. It could have been a teacher, it could have been a parent, it could have been a best friend. And we wanted to know, like, why did this person have an impact on who they are as a human being? And we received a couple hundred, essays. And from there we chose, I think, 12, and Fairfield University men's basketball team gave us tickets for the families, and then we were able to honor them at halftime to give a shout out not only to the kid and their family, but the mentors that they nominated. So it was a win-win situation, and it allowed me as an English teacher to work with coaches and athletes to say that this is all integrated, right? Mark, one of the life skills that is not on the coronavirus, but it is teamwork. It is in your other work, is very important to me too, because my research has shown the importance of community. Can you talk a little bit about Ubuntu before we ask William and Abu to talk about it? What's Ubuntu to you? Why does that word matter?
Well, Ubuntu is it's an ancient African word and more of a philosophy and just a way of life that literally means I am because we are. It's the teamwork for humanity. And I think we're all seeing right now how we all have to work as a team to accomplish something bigger than us. If you've been watching The Last Dance about Michael Jordan, he was accused of not being a great team player. He said, there's no I in team, but he's like, there's an I in win. But it was only when he actually started to have that team philosophy and knowing that we all have to work together in order to achieve something. No great basketball team is just won a championship with just one player. And it happens day to day. I often talk to kids here in America about the concept of Ubuntu, and I liken it to that Subway sandwich that's 12 inches. And there's no way that you're going to sit there and eat all 12 inches of that sandwich by yourself while your friends look on. You're always going to share that 2 inches with your one buddy, maybe an inch with a guy you don't like so much, another inch over there, because tomorrow you never know who's going to have that sandwich. And it's the sharing is caring philosophy, but it's not so much just a one-off. It really is how people can live their lives, and the way that you need to survive and thrive in this world is that we all need to work together.
Indeed.
Indeed. Thank you, Mark. I want to say that, like Gene, I did not grow up playing sports, and I was a terrible athlete as a younger person, and it was only as an adult, and maybe only as an adult in the writing project, that I like Michael Jordan. And that was my favorite episode. Now I'm running 3 strands together. That was my favorite episode so far of The Last Dance, is that episode where Michael Jordan's like, oh God, like I could be the greatest player, but I'm never going to win a championship if I don't support my team. Because I feel like I came to that through teaching, and particularly through being a member of the writing project. So while I might not always choose it as the most important of all of those values, in my mind today, I'm really thinking about how valuable teamwork is, and how much young people who play on teams learn in all aspects of their life, to count on others, to pull others along with them, to know that we're all in it together in a way that, as you said, we're all figuring out right now in a newly significant way.
In Tanya, that's sort of the interesting thing. As a writing project person, when I taught in Louisville, Kentucky, and obviously huge basketball fans there, I learned from my students the importance of community. And when I came to Fairfield University after finishing my doctorate, I kept learning from the kids I was working with that there is no individuality, there's no success unless you're part of a larger community. And that's, a writer is a writer in a community of other writers. A graphic novelist is a graphic novelist in a community of other graphic novelists. And we took that philosophy of togetherness to rethink our summer programs. I had the fortune of attending a program with Steve Bickmore, who's a young adult literature scholar. And there I met a man named Alan Brown and several others who were just really enthusiastic about sports literature for young people to read. And it was there that I started thinking about the ways we could connect young adult literature and novels to writing classrooms, given the passions of our young people. And so I needed to give a shout out to Alan Brown and Steve Bickmore there, because this was an idea that came to me when I was like talking to Chris Crutcher and I was talking to Matt Delapini. I was like, why aren't we creating writing programs for youth on sports? And it was a no-brainer to bring in my cousin Mark, but then it was a no-brainer to bring in Abu and William. And so maybe that's a good place to transition.
It sounds great. Abu and William, it is great to have you here today. William, you're a teacher in Bridgeport Public Schools, and Abu, an educator in Syracuse City Schools. And I am looking forward, because I've heard a lot about your work. In fact, I've interviewed William about this work before, and it's so moving to me. So I'm really excited to hear you talk about how you feel about sports stories, literacy, and hope, and how they matter to people. You two have been collaborating for several years now in summer literacy labs in Connecticut, especially Ubuntu Academy and Sports Writing Lab. William, I'm going to start with you. You teach high school, but you also help to create these summer programs at Fairfield University. Can you tell us about sports writing and Ubuntu Academy? I understand you've been adopting young adult novels for some time to accomplish this work.
Yeah, it's interesting because now that Gene presents this idea of dragon hoops, I'm thinking like, wow, the dragon, right? The mythical character who flies in the sky and is a spectacle and breathes the element that is like fire, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking like the fire or the story or the shared story that we kind of all are talking about today. And then when we take this symbol of a dragon and we attach it to hoops, it makes perfect sense. Like basketball is a place where inclusion happens. So that means basketball can be used to tell stories from all different people, from people who have similar socioeconomic status or diverse socioeconomic status, from people who like cartoons to people who like romance. So it seems like a very, very good starting point and also a segue to what I have been doing in Bridgeport with the support of the writing project, but also with the support of the people that represent the city. So when we look at Ubuntu Academy and when we look at sports literacy, there's one thing that really comes to mind, and that's the shared story experience. Um, and what I've tried to do is I've tried to look at the essence, which is the community, but also the individual as a human. So if you play basketball or you play soccer, initially what that means to me is that you know that there's a connection, you know that there's an understanding of teamwork and team effort. um, so we take that model and we sort of juxtapose it with literature and we say, okay, how can we put those two things together to encourage kids to read more, to encourage kids to have dialogues and discussions about books? Because as a teacher, the large problem that many of teachers around America face is that we cannot encourage kids to read. For some reason, the art of reading is not something that the majority of people like to do, especially kids. So we've decided, okay, let's implement some graphic novels, but let's choose carefully about what types of graphic novels we implement, because we want to make sure that students still understand the idea of community, networking, and sharing diverse stories. So when we look at this text, Dragon Hoops, and then I start to think about what Abu and I have been doing and Bryan with the writing project, I can't help but to see the connection between this mythical character, this thing that is so immense, like a dragon, and then the power of the fire that it breathes, which is our shared story. So in a nutshell, the the writing project has been the way in which I've continued my love of teaching, but it's also been the way in which I've continued the love of community and the idea that without my exposure to Bryan, without my introduction to Mark, without my introduction to Tanya, without my introduction in relationship with Abu, I don't become better. And if I don't become better, then my students don't. So it kind of just brings this thing full circle. And I hope I answered your question, but the last thing I want to mention is this. Um, and Gene mentioned it. He said one thing one of his advice points was people ask him, I have two stories and what do you recommend? And he said, I heard attack your fear, right? That's what I heard. I heard, so go with the object or go with the thing that's most difficult for you. And growing up as an inner city kid in Bridgeport, Connecticut, everything was difficult for me. And so now when I look at my position as being an educator and being an advocate, um, it just makes more sense that I went towards the thing that I feared the most. And that was my acceptance in my story. So Abu, I guess
Well,
it's on
before,
you.
before we get at Abu William, can you jumped in and started talking about Ubuntu Academy, which
Mhm.
is sort of special to Fairfield University. For Gene's sake and for our listeners' sake, can you talk a little bit about what is Ubuntu Academy and how did it come to be?
Yep. Uh, so the story of, let's start with the story of the student who has the label refugee, comes to the United States and they look for peace, but they also look for a nurturing environment. They look for a place where education is given to them or provided without any stipulations. You can just show up and you will learn English. So at the Ubuntu Academy, my partner Jessica and I, and also Abu, we work diligently on supporting students' language abilities that come from historically Africa. So when we started, most of our kids were coming from Africa, and we were supporting their English development throughout the summer. So those 2 weeks turned into possible mentorship that lasted for the entirety of the summer and then rolled over into the school where I teach, which is Bassick High School. So the mission there is this: I can be me based on what we are together. And what that means is I can be a teacher based on not only the quality of instruction, but based on the relationships that I kept with the students that I was serving. And that kind of has been the model. And so we took that and we said, okay, well, how do we take the philosophy of Ubuntu and encourage that into our regular school year? So out of that came the Hope Club project, which is something that I work on with Jessica Balazan, who is at a middle school. And we bring the high school students who are immigrants and refugees with middle school students who are immigrants and refugees. And we read and write and we discuss concepts and ideas together every Tuesday. And then we started a book club. And out of the book club, the motto was Ubuntu. But within the book club, I actually got the participation of other colleagues to say, okay, I want you guys to think about this mission and think about how can you be a better instructor for your students while developing a relationship with kids who are telling a different story. So this philosophy of Ubuntu actually took me from just being a regular classroom teacher to truly understanding how to build community and the public school system. Yeah.
How about you, Abu? You work with William too during the summer, and I also understand that you have come to the United States on quite a journey that has to do with sports and literacy and stepping forward yourself. What are you thinking about right now?
Well, thank you guys again for having us all here. It's been a wonderful, event so far. And as for me, sports has always been my go-to to escape, whether it is on TV or I'm playing it or I'm talking about it with my friends. It's always something that I use to just forget about all my problems. Living in a refugee camp in Africa, education was not something that we looked at as a way to escape because we knew what we had in the camp. That education was not it wasn't valued as it is here in America. But what we realized in the refugee camp was we could use sports to bring each other together because we were all coming from the same place, which was running from war and bullets. So now we're all in the camp and we're having fun and we're using sports as a way to get away from all the harsh circumstances we were facing. And fast forward to 2005 when we relocated in Syracuse, New York, and I realized that hey, I get to go to school now. I actually could value education the same way I value sports back in Africa. And I'm like, wait, this is a great tool that I could use to, move myself forward and move my life forward and help my families not only here but also in Africa. So when I met Bryan in 2008, and he told me about just his work that he was doing and how he was working with refugees to tell their stories. And I was like, this is the perfect opportunity for me to use his platform to just help myself and help my education. And through that, I played soccer and lacrosse. But what was most important was Bryan helping me understand how valuable education was. And if I took my education a little bit serious, like I took my sporting activity, I would be able to make a great life for myself and my family. So see where this goes. And to Bryan introducing me
Abu,
to
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're starting to break up a little bit.
let me read this book from his house, taking it to his family's house.
Abu, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're having the technological difficulties with Abu's audio. It's okay. So I'm just gonna move on. I want to move it back a little bit. You're still breaking up, Abu. Are you there?
You go ahead, Bryan. I'm gonna
All right. If you
send
move on,
Abu a note.
if you move on to the next slide.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that technical difficulties. All right. I want to move it back. Author. We're still having his voice kind of like continue on. Strange. But Zoom's been doing that for us in the last couple of weeks, I've noticed. So, Gene, you heard a little bit about Hoops for Hope. You heard a little bit about what Williams said. What are you thinking in terms of the potential for your book in schools? Like, what are your hopes for Dragon Hoops?
Well, first, I do want to thank William for all his work as a teacher, especially a writing teacher, especially on today, right? Today is National Teachers Day. So happy National Teachers Day. I know it kind of sucks to celebrate something during quarantine, but I hope you at least treat yourself to something awesome today. Like I said, I was at a high school for 17 years, and all of the teachers agreed that the teachers who taught writing had the most difficult job. Like the math teachers, the science teachers, the art teachers, we all agreed the writing teachers had the most difficult job. So thank you for doing that job. In terms of how to use maybe Dragon Hoops in particular, or sports narratives in general to encourage writing. Like I said earlier, one of the things that really struck me during that season with the Bishop O'Dowd Dragons was realizing that sports is actually this narrative tradition, sort of like superhero comics. That's what I grew up with. Superhero comics are a narrative tradition. Sports stories are also this narrative tradition. And when you go to a game, you are actually going to watch a story play out. But the big difference is, with a Superman comic, on page 1, you know that Superman's going to win at the end. But with a basketball game at tip-off, you really have no idea. You could be watching the best team on the planet play. You still are not guaranteed a win. So there's this level of uncertainty that I think teachers can lean into when encouraging writing about sports. Uncertainty is something that's very difficult for human beings to deal with. We like certainty. And I think that's why our current situation is so painful. Nobody really knows how things end. But by leaning into the aspect of writing about sports, I think you can pull out a lot of great things out of your students.
Last summer, my colleague in Florida, Susan James, who's with the Emerald Coast Writing Project, she and I kind of partnered together, and I'm actually wearing my Superman shirt. And we created a program called The Superpower of Hope, where we read young adult novels by Jerry Craft. We read Hope Nation by Rose Brock. And we read Superman, actually, by Matt Della Pina. And we started asking of our teachers, what does hope have to do with this occupation that we have? And we actually had kids who attend Ubuntu Academy, and kids who attend our novel writing labs, and kids who attend sports writing kind of talk to teachers about their hopes and their dreams, and why is hope such a superpower. And when I was doing research on it, I unraveled that the symbol, the actual symbol here is Krypton, and for hope, that's supposedly a symbol for hope. And I had no idea. I was like, what a coincidence. These writers are so smart. And I mention this now because I've also done some reading that Superman smashes the Klan.
Yeah, that's my next project. So Dragon Hoops came out in March. The next book to come out will be in the middle of May 12th. It's Superman Smashes the Klan. Here's the cover right here. And it's a graphic novel that's retelling of this really famous story from the Superman mythos. Back in 1946, Superman actually fought the Klan on his radio show, and he fought the Klan in defense of a Chinese American family who had just moved into Metropolis. The storyline had always fascinated me. First, because it dates back to almost the beginning of Superman, and it has this Chinese American family in it. But second, because it actually had this real world effect, right? So supposedly, after Superman fought the Klan on his radio show, the membership of the real life Klan went down. Now, this story, even though it's so important within the Superman mythos, has never been presented as comics. So I teamed up with an art team called Gurihiru, and we're presenting it as comics for the very first time. It was fun to work on. It was super fun to work on, for sure. But as I said, the big difference is with the Superman comic, you know Superman's going to win at the very end. But with sports, there's no guarantee.
I am so excited, Gene. I hope that you'll consider coming back and having another conversation with us when your new book comes out. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I would love to. This is great. This has been great. I've really enjoyed hearing about what Abu and Mark and William are all doing. It sounds like you all are doing some amazing work. Yeah, and writing project as well. Or the writing. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to the National Writing Project for inviting me.
Thank you, Gene, for being with us. I think if there's anything we can take from this conversation today, it is that if you haven't read Dragon Hoops, you better. And you better hurry, because you got another book coming out in a couple weeks that you're going to need to get. And that as we learn in Dragon Hoops, it's time for all of us to take a step forward. This has been a great show. I love how Dragon Hoops and Hoops for Hope, the National Writing Project, and the Connecticut Writing Project at Fairfield have all found a way to come together around this work. So many of us in our network, can't do this work without exceptional books to share with our young people, and especially exceptional books that show the range of diversity of who is an American and who is among us. So thank you, Gene. It was an honor, really, to have you on our show today. And Mark, I appreciate the way that you're using sports as a vehicle for social action. It's amazing. William and Abu, thank you for representing the whole National Writing Project Network and advocating for the young people in your care. I always have to say when I'm with Bryan, I am feeling the Ubuntu of this work. Finally, I'd like to invite listeners, if you've enjoyed this live stream event, follow the National Writing Project page on Facebook to hear about more upcoming opportunities. And if you're a teacher and would like to be in community with writing teachers like Abu and William from all around the country, please join our Facebook group. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate your time today and all the work you do in the world.
Thank you. Great show.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Yeah, thank you. Abu and William, everyone.